On a lonely stretch of prairie, just as dusk settled into the land, a figure stumbled out of the horizon. His boots dragged, his chest heaved, and blood darkened the fabric of his shirt. By the time he reached the small wooden porch, his knees gave way and the giant cowboy collapsed in a heap of dust and pain. Inside, a woman who had seen far too much injustice in her lifetime opened the door to find him broken and silent at her feet. She did not yet know that saving his life would test her courage and unravel his hardened soul. The year was rough on the frontier, where land was scarce and survival often meant turning away from mercy. The cowboy had built his life on silence, carrying burdens that no one dared to ask about. His towering frame and steely gaze made him appear untouchable, but inside he was fractured, haunted by a past of violence and betrayal. The woman who found him was no stranger to hardship. She lived on the edge of town, where whispers of her name carried prejudice more than kindness. She was of mixed heritage, a daughter of both settlers and the oppressed, and many in town had decided she belonged nowhere. Still, she lived with quiet resilience, tending to her small garden and offering healing herbs to those who dared seek her help. That evening, when the wounded cowboy collapsed on her porch, she faced a choice. Most would have shut the door, pretending not to see. But her heart, hardened by injustice yet softened by compassion, would not let her turn away. She pulled him inside, dragged his heavy frame across the wooden floor, and prepared to mend wounds deeper than flesh. What began as an act of mercy would soon expose scars etched into both their souls. The hours that followed were a test of endurance for both of them. His body bore the marks of brutal conflict, lashes across his back, bruises that told stories of fists and boots, and a gash that nearly ended his life. She cleaned each wound with steady hands, but her mind could not silence the question: who had done this to him and why? As days passed, the cowboy's silence was heavier than words. He recovered slowly, his towering presence confined to her small home. At night, when the prairie winds howled against the wooden walls, she heard him stir in restless sleep, caught in nightmares that revealed more truth than he ever would in daylight. She began to see that his wounds were not only of the flesh, but of the spirit. But while he healed, danger loomed outside. The town had noticed his absence, and rumors spread quickly. Men who thrived on dominance, who saw the world divided by skin and power, began to whisper about where he had gone. Some warned that she should not shelter him. Others threatened that if he stayed, they would come to finish what had been started. The woman had lived long enough with threats. She knew what it was to be cast out, to be branded as unworthy, to carry the weight of injustice without a voice. Protecting him meant facing the very prejudice that had shadowed her life. Yet every time she looked into his weary eyes, she saw the faint flicker of something that defied hate, something fragile, hidden behind walls he had spent years building. Their bond deepened not with words but with survival. She stitched his wounds while he rebuilt her broken fences. She offered food when his pride resisted, and he began to understand that strength was not measured only by fists or scars, but by the quiet endurance of a heart that refuses to harden. The storm came without warning, both from the sky and from the men who brought it. One night, thunder cracked across the plains as hoofbeats thundered closer. A group of riders circled her home, their lanterns glowing like predators' eyes in the dark. They shouted slurs, curses, and demands. They had come for the cowboy, but their venom was aimed at her as well, for daring to defy the order of things, for daring to shelter someone who had no right in their eyes to be saved. The cowboy, still weak but burning with resolve, tried to stand. She stopped him, pressing a firm hand against his chest. She knew his wounds would open again if he fought, and the cycle of violence would never end. Instead, she stepped outside into the storm. Her voice did not shake. She faced them, reminding them of the humanity they had long buried beneath hate. She called them out, not with anger, but with truth that cut sharper than any blade. They mocked her, spat at the ground, and promised they'd return. But as the rain poured and her words carried through the night, even they could not deny the strength in her defiance. Inside, the cowboy watched her stand against the world in a way he never could. For the first time, his walls cracked. Not from her stitching his flesh, but from her fearlessness in stitching together dignity from ashes. He realized then that his greatest wound was not the one carved into his body, but the one carved into his heart by years of silence. By dawn the riders had gone, swallowed by distance and shame. Though their threats lingered, the storm passed, leaving the land washed clean. The cowboy, still aching, helped her mend the damage to the porch. Each board nailed down, each fence repaired, became as a quiet vow between them. That strength could be rebuilt piece by piece. He would never forget the night he fell at her door, broken and bleeding. But what stayed with him more deeply was how she refused to let hate decide the ending of his story. In her presence, he saw that walls built to keep out pain often keep out healing too. She had healed his body, yes, but more than that, she had broken down the fortress of silence he thought he needed to survive. The world beyond her home remained harsh and divided. Injustice still walked the streets, dressed in the faces of men who believed cruelty was power. But in that small corner of the prairie, something stronger took root. It was not love in the simple sense, though love was surely there. It was the recognition of shared humanity, the unspoken bond between two souls who had endured scars, one from fists and bullets, the other from prejudice and exclusion. As the cowboy saddled his horse weeks later, ready to face the world again, he turned back. He understood now that strength was not in being unbroken, but in being willing to be seen, wounds, scars, and all. And he knew she had given him something far greater than survival. Sometimes healing is not about stitching skin, but about daring to break walls that never should have been built. So I leave you with this. How many of us are still carrying walls that keep others out and pain locked within? And what would happen if, just once, we allowed someone in to stitch not our wounds but our hearts?